I came to New Zealand from America a while ago, but lately, I kept hearing how everyone says the new American dream is to move to New Zealand for a better life. As most Americans are wondering, is life better in New Zealand? And that is the one thing we will be answering today, because I'm going to share with you my thoughts and opinion on what living and working in New Zealand is compared to America, and break down the most common expenses like the cost of housing, eating out, and the shocking cultural differences in your everyday life. And at the very end, I'll give you my honest review: is life better in America or New Zealand?
And trust me when I say this is the toughest comparison in the channel's history, and you'll find out why that is right now.
But let me begin by telling you why I came to New Zealand. Because well before I came here, I was working your typical job in the US that isn't going anywhere. Forced to answer emails even in the middle of the night. Gosh, look at those eye bags. But after a trip with my friends to New Zealand, something stuck with me, you know. Kind of like a massive cat sleeping on your lap kind of stuck. And I couldn't help but want to experience more of this lovely nation. And that is why I want to go over the cost of living and getting your groceries, to what really shocked me about life in New Zealand that I can't believe how nobody talks about. And the first thing is the cost of housing, and that includes getting your own apartment to renting a house. But I find it impossible to find the simplest room with nothing but a bed in the big cities in the US anywhere lower than $1,500 a month. Rooms that used to cost $500 to $700 a month a few years ago are now over $3,000. Oh, even worse! One day my landlord decided to double my rent, and I just packed up and signed and haven't gone back to America since. But what about New Zealand? Maybe they're having it better. Well, most places that I've looked at, the rent was about 500 Kiwi dollars a week, which would be about 1,200 American dollars a month. So if you're being paid the same or even slightly less, it's still easier to find a place to live as opposed to America. And that's a first win for New Zealand. Also, not to mention that applying for an apartment here is a lot straightforward. In most cases I saw, they need a deposit or a bond, usually about 4 weeks of your rent set aside. Just make sure if anything happened to the property, you can pay to fix it. But back in America, I got turned down several times because I looked like a foreigner, even though I was born and raised in the US, even though I had a job and could pay for it. Look, you get what I'm saying, okay? But the housing market is a completely different story, as every American friends I have own a house, but none of my Kiwi friends about my age own a house, and many of them still live with their family even though they work full-time. So I guess America gets a point for that. But still, both housing markets need some good old fixing. Otherwise, we're all gonna be on the streets in a few years. But if y'all look at the cost of staying at hotels, well, that's when it gets crazy. Cause millions of people are visiting New Zealand for vacation. I thought it's gonna cost you a lot, but turns out, hotels in New Zealand rarely cost me above $100 a day. And that means the amount I pay for a hotel in America, I can easily stay for 2 times longer here in New Zealand.
For example, you would never believe a room like this in a big city center only cost me about $60 a day. In America, it's never below $100 or even $200 if you're anywhere near downtown.
But to decide the winner between the two nations, we need to delve deeper. And hit the subscribe button if you loved the video so far, because now we're going to check out the cost of eating out. Since I managed to find a similar Japanese ramen, but the one in America was $17, while the one in New Zealand was only $12. But can you believe that the pizza is even cheaper? After conversion, this one in New Zealand was only $9.30. But I don't think it's even possible to find one below $25 in the US these days. This cup of coffee I found in a crazy fancy cafe in New Zealand was only $6, and the pies were anywhere between $4 to $5. But the cup of chocolate latte in my local Starbucks back in America was also $6 or something, as well as the boba tea takeaway. But last time I checked, a pint was well over $10. And the ones in New Zealand totally tasted better and 2 times cheaper. And that's another point for New Zealand.
And none of that matters because do you know what the best thing about New Zealand is? When you go get your food, you don't need to tip. Everything is already included in the price, and over here, it's the employer's duty to pay their staff a living wage. And this is all told to me by the local Kiwi, so keep your tip to yourself.
But what about the brands and fast food that came from America? Surely it has to be way more expensive in New Zealand, right? Well, let's find it out right now. Because I wasn't expecting to see this many American restaurants in New Zealand, but I feel like the locals don't really go there. The customers are mostly international travelers from what I can tell. But nothing shocked me more than the price, because the same chicken sandwich that was $2.50 in America is going to cost you $3 in New Zealand. But the Big Mac I found was only $5.20, as opposed to $7 back in America. I also can't say the same for a lot of snacks like Doritos. This bag was $1.80 in New Zealand, which depending on where you're at in the US, you can get it a lot cheaper.
So I guess it's settled now. For anyone who likes Wendy's, you'll save money in America, and for all my fellow Doritos lovers, you better stay home in the US just to save your daily snack budget.
But I do want to point out that they don't call New Zealand one of the most expensive places to live for no reason, especially after you factor in the wages. Even though the minimum wage here is better than the US, the healthcare is crazy good. I believe it's funded by the government taxes or something. And you do get a lot more paid working days and annual leave as compared to America, where most people I know don't even get a day off, even if they're super sick. Now I'm giving America a point for being easier to save money, but also a point to New Zealand for treating the employees better. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of living in both nations, because you probably know that America is not the safest place to be in the world. But New Zealand, on the other hand, despite many people in news reports saying how you have to be careful in certain places, nothing shady ever happened, even when I was out in the middle of the night. And if that doesn't get a point, I don't know what will.
And it happened to many of my local friends when they saw a sunny day, couldn't stop the urge to go out, coming back home only to find out they forgot to lock the door, or even worse, they left it wide open. But here in New Zealand, especially in smaller towns, it's super safe, and even I forgot to lock the door from time to time. And nothing ever gets stolen, unlike in America.
Making friends and trying to fit in are also common things you might worry about. Is it easier to make friends in America or in New Zealand? Now, I do believe that with how populated the American cities are, it does make it easier to meet someone and potentially become friends. But many of my friends in New Zealand also manage to find a place in the community by volunteering, joining a sports club, or even just going outdoors whenever they have time. Personally, I do yoga, so I was able to make a lot of yoga friends in New Zealand real quick. So I don't think it's necessarily more difficult to make friends, as many have pointed out on the internet. So you guys both get a point from it.
If anything, New Zealand feels like what America used to be like, when everyone would say hi to one another when you make eye contact, especially out in the woods. But the terrible economy is taking a toll on everyone, where people look more tired than ever before.
But if there's one thing I absolutely love about the Kiwi culture, and can't wait for America to do the same, it's leaving the shoes at the door when going into a house. Now, not everyone does that, but taking the mud stuck under your shoes into someone else's home is widely considered impolite. Some hotels I know even tell you to wear indoor shoes or slippers when inside. And thanks to that, New Zealand has some of the cleanest apartments and hotel rooms I've ever seen. And that's totally a point for them.
This means you're more than welcome to do the same, because you don't want to be that type of foreigner.
But I do want to point out how amazing New Zealand is at preserving history. There's a general sense of remembering your past and how it makes you who you are. And it's easy to go to a town with everyone willing to tell you what happened in the past 70 years. The love for environment is also another thing, as I believe there's some policy on plastic bags and straws, where it is common to see people bring their reusable bags when shopping around. And yes, you can argue that New Zealand is all about nature and tourism, so they do have the pressure to keep everything clean. But I see it more as a collective care for the nature, not for any capitalistic reason, but simply because they love the nature. And maybe that's what makes New Zealand one of a kind.
But if there's one thing that both New Zealand and America need to do better at, would be public transportation as advanced as the ones we see in nations like Australia and Japan. Because it's still impossible to travel around without some sort of vehicle, as well as not having sidewalk outside or even in the city, to the point you have to get dangerously close to the traffic if you were to walk in both the US and New Zealand.
But the closest match between America and New Zealand has to be the sense of humor. Both Americans and Kiwis are the funniest people you'll meet in the world. Different types of humor. One is a bit dark and sarcastic. The other is a right in the face and body language kind of humor. But both as funny nevertheless. I do admire how despite the economy not being easy on everyone, Americans and Kiwis still never give up on being funny to put the biggest smile on the face of a stranger, even if they just met. And that alone gets a thumbs up for you all.
But after all that, I have to say both nations are surprisingly similar, to the point you can't believe they're like 17-20 hours away from one another. And yes, maybe the scenery is a little bit different, maybe the cost of living is a little different, and most importantly, you don't have to tip over here when getting your food, which is already way better than what? 30% tip many of us are forced to pay just to get a cup of coffee in America. But hey, let us look at the final score.
In the end, New Zealand wins for being a better place to live, but America is still good if you do get a good paying job, as minimum wage and not having insurance in the US is no fun. But in the next video, I'm comparing Australia to America to see what exactly they're doing better, and what America has to learn from them before it's too late. And you can click on the video right now.